The streets of Benin City had always been alive with movement. Taxi horns echoed through crowded intersections. Market traders called out to customers from dawn until dusk. Government workers hurried to their offices while children walked to school under the hot Nigerian sun. On the surface, life appeared ordinary, but beneath that routine, something darker was beginning to take shape. By the mid-1980s, fear had become a daily companion for many residents of the old Bendel state. Armed robberies were increasing in both frequency and violence. Travelers avoided certain roads after sunset. Businesses closed earlier than they once had. Rumors spread faster than official reports, and every new attack seemed more brutal than the last. At the center of this growing nightmare was one man. His name was Lawrence Anini. To some, he was simply another criminal. To others, he became a symbol of a law enforcement system struggling with corruption and inefficiency. Newspapers chronicled his crimes almost daily, while radio broadcasts carried updates that gripped the nation. Before long, his name alone was enough to send waves of fear across Nigeria. This is the true story of Lawrence Anini, his rise, his reign of terror, and the manhunt that eventually brought one of Nigeria's most infamous armed robbers to justice. Lawrence Anini was born around 1960 into a modest family of the Bini ethnic group in Benin City, then part of the Midwestern region of Nigeria, later known as Bendel State. Reliable details about his childhood remain scarce. Unlike many infamous criminals whose early lives are well documented, much of Anini's upbringing has been reconstructed from newspaper reports, court records, and accounts published after his arrest. These sources often differ on minor details, but they agree that he grew up in modest circumstances and received only limited formal education. Those who later claimed to have known him described him as quiet and physically strong. There was little in those early years to suggest that he would become one of the most feared criminals in Nigerian history. Like many young men searching for work, Anini entered the transportation industry. He became a taxi driver. In the Nigeria of the early 1980s, taxi driving was demanding but respectable work. Drivers spent long hours navigating busy streets and rural highways, transporting passengers from markets, bus stations, hotels, and government offices. The job offered freedom but also exposed drivers to every layer of society, from ordinary workers to businessmen, politicians, police officers, and criminals. For Anini, the taxi became more than a means of earning a living. It became a classroom. Every road taught him a shortcut. Every neighborhood revealed another escape route. Every passenger offered a glimpse into how money moved through the city. He learned which businesses handled large amounts of cash, which roads were poorly patrolled, and where police checkpoints operated. Over time, this knowledge would prove invaluable. Nigeria itself was undergoing immense economic and political strain. The early 1980s were marked by recession, unemployment, inflation, and uncertainty. Falling oil prices placed enormous pressure on the national economy. Military governments sought to restore order, but ordinary Nigerians often faced hardship. Opportunities became increasingly scarce, particularly for young people with limited education. Economic hardship alone does not explain violent crime, nor does it determine a person's choices. Countless Nigerians endured the same conditions without turning to violence, yet the environment created opportunities for organized criminal groups to recruit new members, and armed robbery became a growing concern in several parts of the country. It was during this period that Anini drifted into the criminal underworld. Initially, he was reportedly involved in smaller criminal activities, associating with local gangs and individuals already known to police. These early offenses rarely attracted national attention, but they allowed him to build connections with experienced criminals. More importantly, they taught him how to operate outside the law. As his confidence grew, so did his ambitions. Unlike impulsive criminals driven purely by emotion, Anini developed a reputation for careful planning. He studied potential targets before striking. Escape routes were mapped in advance. Vehicles were selected for speed and reliability. timing was calculated to minimize resistance while maximizing the chances of success. This level of organization distinguished his operations from ordinary street crime. By the mid-1980s, Anini had become the leader of a growing gang composed of armed robbers with clearly defined roles. Some members specialized in stealing vehicles, others served as drivers, scouts, or gunmen. Each robbery was planned with military-like precision, allowing the gang to strike quickly before disappearing into the maze of roads surrounding Benin City. Authorities struggled to keep pace. One factor made the situation even more dangerous. Investigators later uncovered evidence suggesting that some corrupt police officers had leaked operational information to criminals, warning them about patrol routes, planned raids, and investigations. While not every allegation was proven in court, multiple inquiries during the period highlighted serious concerns about corruption within parts of the security system. For a gang like Anini's, insider information could mean the difference between capture and escape. The result was devastating. Each successful robbery increased the gang's confidence. Each failed police operation strengthened Anini's reputation. Citizens began to whisper that he seemed untouchable. Soon his crimes grew bolder. Instead of targeting isolated victims, the gang attacked banks, commercial vehicles, wealthy individuals, and travelers along major highways. Firearms were used freely, and violence became increasingly common whenever resistance was encountered. The newspapers responded with alarming headlines. Stories described heavily armed robbers striking without warning before vanishing into the night. Families mourned loved ones. Businesses suffered financial losses. Communities demanded stronger action from the authorities. As public fear intensified, Lawrence Anini transformed from a local criminal into a national figure. People began referring to him by a nickname that reflected his apparent ability to evade capture: the law. It was a chilling irony. The man who repeatedly broke the law had become known by a title that suggested authority itself. For months, the nickname spread across Nigeria through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and word of mouth. Whether exaggerated by rumor or reinforced by his repeated escapes, Anini's image grew larger than life. Yet behind that fearsome reputation stood a criminal organization becoming increasingly reckless. Each successful operation generated greater pressure on police commanders. Government officials demanded arrests. Special investigative teams were formed. Roadblocks multiplied across Benin State. Informants were recruited. The search for Lawrence Anini had begun. At first, the gang remained one step ahead, but every robbery left behind witnesses. Every escape created new evidence. Every trusted associate became a potential weakness. Without realizing it, Anini had already begun making the mistakes that would eventually bring his empire crashing down. And as his confidence reached its highest point, the most violent chapter of his story was only beginning. By 1985, Lawrence Anini was no longer just another armed robber operating in Benin City. He had become the leader of one of the most feared criminal gangs in Nigeria. His organization was disciplined, heavily armed, and remarkably efficient. Unlike many criminals who acted on impulse, Anini's gang often planned its operations in advance. Members gathered intelligence on potential targets, monitored police patrols, identified escape routes, and used stolen vehicles to move quickly before security forces could respond. The gang operated primarily across Benin City and other parts of the old Benin State, but the fear they created spread far beyond the region. Every successful robbery added to Anini's growing reputation. Every escape made him seem almost impossible to catch. As weeks turned into months, many Nigerians began to believe that the police were losing control. The gang's attacks became increasingly violent. Travelers on highways were ambushed. Businesses carrying large amounts of cash became attractive targets. Commercial vehicles were stopped at gunpoint. Victims who resisted were often shot without hesitation. Survivors later described terrifying scenes of masked gunmen appearing within seconds, firing automatic weapons into the air to create panic before seizing money and valuables. The robberies rarely lasted long. Within minutes, the gang disappeared. By the time police arrived, they were gone. One of the reasons for their repeated success was mobility. Anini understood roads better than many of the officers pursuing him. His years as a taxi driver had given him an intimate knowledge of Benin City's streets, side roads, and rural escape routes. The gang frequently abandoned stolen vehicles after robberies and switched to others waiting at predetermined locations, making pursuit extremely difficult. Witnesses often provided conflicting descriptions. Some remembered different vehicles. Others described different numbers of attackers. The confusion worked in Anini's favor. As public anxiety grew, newspaper headlines became increasingly dramatic. Reports described armed robbers operating with extraordinary boldness, striking in broad daylight as well as after dark. Each new attack reinforced the perception that Anini's gang could appear anywhere at any time. Behind the scenes, investigators faced another challenge: corruption within sections of law enforcement. Several official investigations and contemporary reports suggested that some police personnel had leaked operational information to criminal groups during this period. In Anini's case, authorities concluded that confidential details about planned checkpoints and police movements had at times reached members of his gang. This did not mean the entire police force was compromised. Many officers risked their lives trying to stop him, but even a handful of corrupt insiders made the investigation far more difficult. Planned raids failed, roadblocks were avoided, arrest operations ended with empty buildings and abandoned hideouts. Each failure further damaged public confidence. The gang's growing confidence soon led to even greater violence. Among the crimes that shocked the nation were attacks on members of the Nigeria police force. Several officers were killed while attempting to confront heavily armed robbers. These incidents demonstrated that the gang was willing to engage security personnel directly rather than flee at the first sign of resistance. Such attacks transformed Anini from a dangerous robber into one of Nigeria's most wanted fugitives. The government responded by increasing pressure on law enforcement agencies. Senior police commanders demanded results. Special investigative teams expanded surveillance across Bendel State. Checkpoints multiplied on major roads leading into and out of Benin City. Informants were quietly recruited from neighborhoods where gang members were believed to operate. Despite these efforts, arrests remained elusive. Every time investigators believed they were closing in, the gang vanished. Rumors began circulating among frightened residents. Some claimed Anini possessed supernatural powers. Others insisted he could disappear into thin air. Stories spread that bullets could not harm him. Like many legends surrounding notorious criminals, these tales grew with every successful escape. There has never been credible evidence that Anini possessed any supernatural abilities. His ability to evade capture was far more likely the result of careful planning, local knowledge, operational discipline, and at times information leaked by corrupt contacts. Yet in an atmosphere dominated by fear, myths often spread faster than facts. The nickname "the Law" became even more widely known. It reflected the unsettling belief that Anini operated with greater freedom than the authorities tasked with stopping him. For ordinary citizens, daily life changed. Many businesses closed earlier than usual. Drivers became reluctant to travel after sunset. Families warned relatives against using isolated highways at night. Communities organized neighborhood watches, hoping to deter criminal attacks before police could arrive. The psychological impact reached far beyond the victims themselves. Fear became part of everyday life. Then came one of the incidents that intensified the nationwide manhunt. In August 1986, police officer Inspector Akagbosu was fatally shot during an encounter linked to Anini's gang. The killing drew enormous public attention and intensified demands for decisive action against the organization. For the police, the murder of one of their own became a turning point. The search was no longer simply about stopping armed robbery. It had become a matter of restoring public confidence and demonstrating that no criminal was beyond the reach of the law. Investigators reviewed hundreds of witness statements. Known associates were placed under surveillance. Informants received promises of protection. Slowly, fragments of information began fitting together. The gang that once appeared invisible was beginning to leave a trail. What investigators did not yet realize was that the greatest threat to Lawrence Anini was no longer the expanding police operation. It was the growing pressure within his own criminal network. The larger the organization became, the more difficult it was to maintain secrecy. Every robbery created new witnesses. Every recruit introduced another potential weakness. Every trusted accomplice carried the possibility of betrayal. The empire Anini had spent years building was beginning to crack from within. And somewhere inside that widening circle of associates, someone was about to provide investigators with the breakthrough they had been desperately seeking. The hunt for Nigeria's most wanted armed robber was about to enter its final phase. By the closing months of 1986, the Nigerian government had reached a breaking point. For nearly 2 years, Lawrence Anini and his gang had terrorized communities across the old Bendel state. Armed robberies had become increasingly violent. Police officers had been killed in the line of duty, and public confidence in law enforcement had been severely shaken. The pressure on the Nigeria police force was immense. Every failed operation made headlines. Every new robbery fueled public outrage. For senior police commanders, capturing Anini was no longer just about arresting a criminal. It had become a test of the state's ability to enforce the law. A new strategy began to emerge. Instead of relying solely on roadblocks and patrols, investigators shifted their focus toward intelligence gathering. Experienced detectives concluded that no criminal organization could survive without support. Someone supplied the gang with weapons, someone provided vehicles, someone arranged safe houses, someone knew where they hid after each robbery. If those connections could be identified, Anini's circle would begin to collapse. The investigation became quieter. Rather than conducting large, highly visible raids, detectives worked patiently behind the scenes. They questioned suspected associates, monitored known meeting places, and compared witness statements collected over months of investigations. Small details that had once seemed insignificant suddenly became valuable. A vehicle seen near one robbery appeared in another witness statement weeks later. A familiar nickname surfaced in multiple interviews. Telephone contacts, financial transactions, and personal relationships were examined with renewed urgency. The net was slowly tightening. At the same time, the atmosphere inside Anini's organization was changing. Living as Nigeria's most wanted fugitive came with constant pressure. Gang members could no longer move freely. Safe houses had to be changed frequently. Every unfamiliar face brought suspicion. Every unexpected knock on a door carried the possibility of arrest. The confidence that had once defined the gang was gradually being replaced by caution. As investigators closed in, mistakes began to appear. Some members became careless. Others attracted attention through lavish spending that far exceeded any legitimate source of income. Police surveillance increased around neighborhoods believed to harbor members of the gang. Each arrest, even of lower-level associates, provided investigators with another piece of the puzzle. Then came the breakthrough. According to official accounts, investigators obtained crucial intelligence that pointed them toward one of Anini's hideouts in Benin City. The information did not arrive through luck alone. It was the result of months of surveillance, interrogation of suspects, and the careful analysis of intelligence gathered from multiple sources. Police moved quickly. Every detail of the operation was kept confidential to reduce the risk of information leaking to corrupt insiders. This time, there could be no mistakes. On the evening of December 3, 1986, officers surrounded a residence in Benin City where Anini was believed to be hiding. The operation unfolded rapidly. As security personnel closed in, Anini attempted to escape. Gunfire erupted. For a brief moment, the man who had evaded capture for so long appeared determined to fight his way out once again. But this time, the outcome was different. During the exchange, Anini was shot. The bullet struck him in the lower part of his body, causing severe injuries that left him unable to flee. He was overpowered and taken into police custody. The arrest marked the end of one of the largest manhunts in Nigerian criminal history. News spread almost instantly. Radio stations interrupted regular programming. Newspapers rushed out special editions. Across Nigeria, many people struggled to believe the reports. The man whose name had become synonymous with fear had finally been captured. Crowds gathered outside police stations hoping to catch a glimpse of him. For many citizens, seeing photographs of Anini in custody was the first undeniable proof that he was, after all, an ordinary man, not the supernatural figure described in countless rumors. Investigators wasted no time. With Anini in custody, detectives intensified efforts to dismantle the remainder of his network. Hideouts were searched, weapons were recovered, vehicles linked to previous robberies were traced. Several associates were arrested while others went into hiding. The gang that had once operated with military-like precision rapidly began to disintegrate. As questioning continued, investigators pieced together the full extent of the organization's activities. The evidence connected the gang to numerous armed robberies, murders, and attacks carried out across Benin State. Testimony from witnesses, forensic evidence available at the time, recovered weapons, and statements from arrested accomplices strengthened the prosecution's case. Perhaps even more disturbing were revelations concerning corruption. Investigators alleged that certain police officers had provided information to members of Anini's gang, warning them of planned operations and helping them avoid arrest. These allegations reinforced public concerns that corruption within sections of law enforcement had allowed the gang to operate for far longer than it otherwise might have. The disclosures sparked a national debate. How could such a notorious criminal have remained free for so long? How many opportunities to arrest him had been lost because confidential information had been leaked? Those questions would continue to echo long after Anini's capture. Meanwhile, doctors treated the injuries he had sustained during his arrest. The gunshot wounds left him partially paralyzed, and throughout the legal proceedings that followed, he required significant medical attention. The once feared gang leader who had outrun police for years now faced a very different reality. His movements were restricted, his empire had collapsed, and for the first time in years, he could no longer control what happened next. The nation watched closely as prosecutors prepared one of the most closely followed criminal cases in Nigerian history. The evidence was mounting. Witnesses were ready to testify. The era of daring escapes and violent robberies had come to an end. Now, Lawrence Anini would have to answer for his crimes in a court of law. The trial that followed would captivate the country and determine the fate of the man once known simply as the Law. The capture of Lawrence Anini marked the end of his life as a fugitive, but for the victims, their families, and a nation that had lived under the shadow of his crimes, the most important chapter was only beginning. Justice would now be tested in the courtroom. As investigators finalized their case, the scale of Anini's criminal enterprise became clearer. Detectives spent weeks organizing witness statements, ballistic reports, recovered weapons, police records, and physical evidence gathered from multiple crime scenes across Benin State. The investigation painted a disturbing picture. This was not the story of a lone gunman acting on impulse. It was the story of an organized criminal network responsible for a series of violent armed robberies, murders, and attacks that had left communities traumatized and police officers dead. For prosecutors, the objective was straightforward. They needed to demonstrate that Lawrence Anini had not only participated in these crimes but had directed many of the gang's operations. As legal proceedings began, public interest reached extraordinary levels. Courtrooms filled with journalists, newspapers devoted entire pages to daily developments, radio broadcasts summarized testimony for listeners across the country. For many Nigerians, the trial represented more than the prosecution of a notorious criminal. It was an opportunity to restore faith in a justice system that had appeared powerless during Anini's reign of terror. When Anini appeared before the court, the contrast with his public image was striking. The man who had once terrified an entire region was now visibly weakened by the gunshot wounds he had suffered during his arrest. Confined by his injuries and under heavy security, he no longer projected the image of an untouchable outlaw. Yet the seriousness of the charges against him remained unchanged. Prosecutors presented evidence linking him and members of his gang to numerous armed robberies and murders committed during the mid-1980s. Witnesses described terrifying encounters with heavily armed robbers. Survivors recalled vehicles being intercepted on highways. Business owners recounted attacks in which large sums of money were stolen. Police officers testified about investigations that had stretched on for months, often ending in frustration as the gang repeatedly escaped. Each witness added another piece to the case. Each testimony reinforced the prosecution's argument that Anini had led one of the most dangerous criminal organizations Nigeria had faced. The proceedings also exposed an issue that deeply disturbed the public: corruption within sections of law enforcement. During the investigation, authorities uncovered evidence that some police personnel had provided confidential information to members of Anini's gang. Those leaks had allegedly included details about planned raids, patrol routes, and police operations. Among those implicated was DSP George Ayamu, a senior police officer accused of supplying information and ammunition to Anini's gang. His arrest shocked the country and became one of the most significant examples of alleged police complicity in organized crime during that era. For many Nigerians, these revelations answered a question that had lingered for years: how had Anini managed to stay one step ahead of the authorities for so long? The answer appeared to lie not only in careful planning and local knowledge, but also in the betrayal of public trust by individuals sworn to uphold the law. The court heard extensive evidence against both Anini and several of his associates. The prosecution argued that the gang had deliberately used overwhelming violence to intimidate victims and eliminate resistance. Firearms were displayed as evidence. Recovered ammunition was examined. Investigators explained how witness testimony, seized weapons, and other material evidence connected members of the gang to multiple crimes. The defense challenged aspects of the prosecution's case, as expected in any criminal trial. But the volume of evidence proved difficult to overcome. After hearing the testimony and reviewing the evidence, the court found Lawrence Anini guilty of multiple offenses, including armed robbery and the unlawful possession of firearms. Other members of the gang were also convicted for their roles in the criminal enterprise. The verdict was met with relief in many parts of the country. Families of victims believed that justice had finally been served. Police officers who had spent months pursuing the gang viewed the convictions as the conclusion of one of the most demanding investigations in Nigerian history. The sentence reflected the gravity of the crimes. The court imposed the death penalty. For Anini, there would be no possibility of returning to the streets that had once made him infamous. The legal process moved swiftly. On March 29, 1987, less than 4 months after his arrest, Lawrence Anini was executed by firing squad at Benin prison alongside several convicted members of his gang, including Monday Osunbor, Friday Ofege, Bernard Ogedengbe, Samson Isibor, Roland Egbe, and Michael Egbe. The executions brought a dramatic conclusion to one of Nigeria's most infamous criminal cases. News of Anini's death spread across the country within hours. For some, it marked the end of a terrifying chapter. For others, it served as a warning about the consequences of violent crime. Yet the story did not end with the executions. The investigation had exposed weaknesses that extended far beyond one criminal gang. It had revealed how corruption could undermine law enforcement, how organized crime could flourish when institutions failed, and how fear could spread through entire communities when criminals believed they were beyond the reach of justice. Even after the firing squad had carried out the sentence, those lessons remained. The name Lawrence Anini disappeared from police wanted lists, but it would never disappear from Nigeria's history. His crimes, his capture, and his trial became part of the country's collective memory, studied by law enforcement, remembered by survivors, and discussed for decades whenever conversations turned to the most notorious criminals Nigeria had ever known. The bullets fired at Benin prison ended the life of Lawrence Anini. They did not end the questions his story left behind. Those questions and the legacy of one of Nigeria's most feared armed robbers would continue to shape discussions about crime, policing, and justice long after the courtroom had fallen silent. On the morning after Lawrence Anini's execution, the streets of Benin City looked much as they always had. Markets reopened, commercial buses returned to their routes, children walked to school, life moved forward. But for many Nigerians, something had changed. For nearly 2 years, the name Lawrence Anini had dominated newspaper headlines and radio broadcasts. His crimes had instilled fear across the old Bendel state and captured the attention of the entire nation. His execution closed one chapter, but the questions raised by his story would linger for decades. The case left behind more than memories of a notorious armed robber. It forced Nigeria to confront uncomfortable realities about crime, policing, and public trust. One of the most significant lessons was the danger of corruption within law enforcement. Throughout the investigation, authorities concluded that Anini's gang had benefited from information leaked by corrupt police personnel. The arrests and convictions of officers connected to the case exposed vulnerabilities that extended far beyond a single criminal organization. For many Nigerians, that revelation was deeply unsettling. It suggested that the greatest threat to public safety was not only the criminals carrying weapons, but also the betrayal of those entrusted to stop them. The Anini case became a powerful reminder that effective policing depends not only on manpower and equipment, but also on integrity. In the years that followed, police agencies placed greater emphasis on internal discipline, intelligence gathering, and accountability. While organized crime did not disappear, the case became an enduring example of how corruption could undermine even the most determined investigations. The story also changed how armed robbery was viewed in Nigeria. Before Anini's rise, many robberies received only regional attention. His crimes transformed armed robbery into a national security issue. The violence associated with his gang demonstrated that organized criminal groups could challenge law enforcement, disrupt daily life, and spread fear far beyond the locations where their attacks occurred. For ordinary citizens, the psychological impact was profound. People altered their routines. Businesses became more cautious about transporting cash. Drivers avoided isolated highways after dark. Communities organized neighborhood security groups and became more vigilant about suspicious activity. Fear had reshaped everyday life. Over time, however, another phenomenon began to emerge. The facts of Anini's life slowly became intertwined with legend. Stories circulated that he possessed supernatural powers. Some claimed bullets could not kill him. Others insisted he could vanish moments before police arrived. There were even rumors that he practiced powerful rituals that made him invisible. These stories spread through word of mouth, newspaper speculation, and popular folklore. Yet none of these claims has been supported by credible historical evidence. The official record tells a different story. Lawrence Anini evaded capture because he understood the terrain, planned his operations carefully, relied on a disciplined criminal network, and, according to investigators, benefited at times from information supplied by corrupt contacts. His eventual arrest demonstrated that he was not invincible. He was a fugitive whose luck eventually ran out. Separating myth from fact is essential. Legends can make criminals appear larger than life. History reminds us that they remain accountable for the choices they make. Today, Anini's name continues to appear in books, documentaries, newspaper retrospectives, and discussions about Nigeria's criminal history. Researchers studying organized crime frequently reference his case as one of the defining examples of violent armed robbery during the 1980s. For younger generations, his story is often something they hear from parents or grandparents who lived through those years. For those who experienced that period firsthand, the memories are far more personal. Some remember hearing gunfire in the distance. Others remember avoiding certain roads after sunset. Many remember the constant uncertainty of never knowing where the next robbery might occur. Those memories cannot be measured by newspaper headlines alone. They belong to the people whose lives were forever altered by violence. Looking back nearly 4 decades later, Lawrence Anini's story is not one of admiration. It is a cautionary tale. His rise to notoriety brought fear instead of respect. His ability to evade arrest created anxiety rather than power, and the criminal empire he built collapsed almost as quickly as it had risen. In the end, the man once known as the Law discovered the same truth that confronts every fugitive. No criminal network is immune to mistakes. No empire built on violence lasts forever, and no reputation, no matter how feared, is greater than the consequences of the law. The story of Lawrence Anini remains one of the most significant true crime cases in Nigerian history, not because he was unstoppable, not because he was a legend, but because his crimes exposed the devastating human cost of violence, the dangers of corruption, and the importance of a justice system capable of holding even the most feared offenders accountable. His victims deserve to be remembered. The investigators who pursued the case deserve recognition, and the lessons learned from that era remain relevant today. Because history is not only about remembering those who committed terrible crimes, it is also about understanding how societies respond to them and how those responses shape the future. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more carefully researched true crime stories from around the world. Each case is presented with respect for the victims, attention to historical accuracy, and a commitment to separating documented fact from myth. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and remember that the darkest stories are often the ones that truly happened.